This meeting is being recorded.
Hi, welcome everyone to a special Inks and Tomes, the Inkcatcher Book Club special, where
Family
we,
edition.
family edition, where we discuss the Shadow and Bone trilogy before our next week's special episode, where the four of us, the usual four of us, with Johnny and Becca, discuss the Shadow and Bone TV series, but with Alex and I knowing what the books are about and Becca and Johnny only having read Six of Crows, which, if you haven't seen the reviews and our very interesting takes on the series by the amount of dislikes on Crooked Kingdom, um, you can check them out. I will link them up in the cards above and in the description down below, so feel free to do that. But yes, we are here, family edition. We can't be in the same room because I just don't have devices that can cope with that amount of data, video data. So we have to do it on Zoom. But yes, we are talking about the Shadow and Bone trilogy by Leigh Bardugo because there is some hot takes. There are some hot takes about the series and in preparation for the many rants and bants for next week. So, Alex, are you ready?
No,
Okay,
no.
good.
As this bottle can show, I'm definitely not ready.
uh, Please do the disclaimer that it's full of water and not anything.
Yes, of course. I would never do that.
But yes, okay, so a short summary of Shadow and Bone, if you haven't heard of what it is, which I highly doubt, but it's a fantasy series by Leigh Bardugo. It is essentially the establishing trilogy of the Grisha-verse, which basically takes our world and shifts it around a bit. We have cultures inspired by Eastern Europe, by Western Europe, by Ireland, by East Asia, and kind of shuffled all around. And on top of that, we have individuals who are capable of mastering the small science or able to manipulate elements at their fundamental level, such as fire, water, air, Avatar, The Last Airbender, and stuff like darkness or sunlight. So in this case, this series introduces us to a character called Alina, who is a map maker in the First Army for a government or for a country called Ravka. And through a series of events, she turns out to be a Grisha, who is the Sun Summoner, a individual who many of the other Grisha have been waiting for a very, very long time. And it is now her destiny to battle this massive swatch of darkness on the land called the Fold. However, stuff is not what it seems, and we are going to get into it right now. So if you haven't read the series, please click off right now. That's the end of the non-spoiler bit. Let's
We're
go.
happy to have you.
Yeah, we're happy. We're happy
you.
to have you. If you want to stick around and you don't mind spoilers, then by all means. But fair warning. Now, I should also disclaim that we are not going to go into the TV show whatsoever. If you'd like to get a more thorough look about how the book compares to the TV show, that is going to be next episode. Right now, it's just going to be the book. Anyway, so Alex, favorite character and least favorite character, and we are talking about the entire trilogy. We're going to take it as all three books as one.
Okay, so the easy answer, the cop-out answer really has to be Nikolai. Nikolai is the shining light throughout this entire trilogy. He is honestly just he is banter personified. He is what I would have loved Kaz Becker to be in The Six of Crows in terms of charisma, not as dark, just as witty, plays a central role, and I can only be more excited about him in King of Scars and moving forward. But upon rethinking for this review, going through just in terms of character development, in terms of how it goes, I have to say that as you can't really call him a dark horse because he is one of the main characters of this trilogy, but I honestly, looking back, really appreciate the character of the Darkling. The Darkling has, in terms of character evolution, he is one of, if not the best characters progressively through the entire story, because his role changes throughout the books, and while parts of it are sort of left untapped, like at the end, and we'll get to all that, the Darkling for me is one of prime character building and being able to sympathize with the character, even though the things that they have done are just downright deplorable.
Okay. Yeah, fair enough. I mean, I definitely agree with you about Nikolai. Nikolai is my favorite character, hands down. I think he was honestly the prototype for Kaz and Jesper. He kind of seems like the combination of those two, and that is why when I saw him, he was the first character I felt like was an actual character on the page rather than in a way of a caricature of what a character is meant to be. I would have to preface and say this, that this trilogy definitely to me felt like an earlier work of Bardugo's. You can tell that this was where she started off. So if you're expecting something at the level, I mean, even the size of the font and the amount of information, the amount of exposition is levels below what we got in Six of Frozen Crooked Kingdom. So Nikolai was the first character that kind of went in and you were just like, wow, okay, I see you. Like this is where we're heading at. And I really like that he was charismatic. I like multifaceted characters who have this tendency to change persona depending on what environment they are. Therefore, I really like the fact that he was Stormhund, and I liked the fact that he then, Alina could never get a handle on him when they were traveling, etc. It was like, is he acting like the prince? Is he acting like himself? Is he acting like Stormhund? Is he acting like a politician? There's multifaceted, and I really appreciated that about him. The Darkling was also I would say he was a very fleshed out villain, but I think my enjoyment of him is marred by the amount of people who continue to ship him with Alina, and I'm just like, that is problematic, and I think that kind of influenced my appreciation for him. But as a villain, I do agree that he's quite good.
I can understand that, and I mean, at least the ending for the book for me, when sort of, I mean, I guess we're already spoiled.
Yeah.
When he's being burnt at the pyre, sort of this emotional send-off after Alina has him cremated with, who was the other person there? Oh, the body of the person who was standing in for Alina. So like the Sun Summoner is dead. That to me shows that the relationship of where it has escalated to, and sort of I'll get into it more as one of my actually favorite scenes, surprisingly, even though the build up to that is just completely void of any emotional connection whatsoever. But the relationship between them as it stands, as it ends, is pure. It's very pure. It's a very satisfying ending to what it should have been, and it leaves a lot of things open. But yes, for now, I would say that, at least for the Darkling, in my perspective, it shouldn't be, outside influence aside, very strong character, and that shouldn't take away from the enjoyment of him as a character. All of you people who are shipping them together, stop it. Just stop it.
Yeah.
After everything, just stop it.
Like, I understand Ben Barnes, but like, come on, my guys, yeah. But I am going to tack on and say this might be a bit controversial, but I actually liked the nuance of Mal, book Mal. I think book Mal, especially in book 2, where he was I mean, again, this is my opinion. Like, I appreciated like, if you put yourself into Mal's shoes, that all of a sudden, I'm not saying that he was being unreasonable and downright just stupid, and like there's a ton of problems around Mal, but the essence of him in book 2 especially, where he's like torn between not being able to do anything for Alina and yet having to be present there. I felt that his kind of slide into being irrational, being a bit more violent, being starting to get out of character was actually very in character. Like, imagine your entire life you spent with this person, and all of a sudden they're thrust into, again, he didn't like Grisha. Like, you're thrust into something that you were completely opposed to, and now you have to accept it. And on top of that, she is somewhere where you can't follow. Like, you don't have power, you can't do much. The only thing you can do, as he constantly points out, is like, I can track for you, and that's what I will do. And as a human being, you can be resentful because of that. And I thought that that was a very human thing in Mal. Whether it was, you know, to the extremes that he was that he took it to, or, you know, the logic at the end that how it turned out that he was always like, oh, you know, I can't connect to you being a Grisha and stuff like that, and in the end Alina stops being a Grisha, and you're just like, well, I guess Mal got what he wanted in the end. I mean, like, that's its own thing. But like, from, I would say, that element of Mal that was suffering in a way from having that massive change to somebody super close to him was very realistic in a sense, and I appreciated that.
I will agree with you, but the only thing I will agree in terms of how it is portrayed, in terms of it's a very realistic evolution of a character, like you said, to have to adapt to these new circumstances. But I feel like the writing massively lets him down.
Yeah.
And this is where you can see Leigh Bardugo's sort of, that this is the first trilogy that she made, or the first book series that she made, because there is a lot of redundancy in terms of description, in terms of pacing is one of the biggest problems of this series, and a lot of that comes down to focusing too much on specific areas, one of which being Mal and Alina's relationship, and sort of having, at least in my opinion, going over and over the fact of him. I don't know how many times, I think it's like upward of 6 times they have the same conversation over and over and over again, where he's telling her, like, look, you know, I'm not Grisha, like, you've squatted into this life, I can't do this. And again, like you said, I appreciate the fact that they're dealing with this in a very real way. But when you're just hammering it over and over and over, and maybe that's how it would be, but it feels like it wasn't being implemented into the story. It was just the same argument was being rehashed chapter after chapter, but then it wasn't adding anything. It was just as a reminder, like, hey, remember, Mal's not happy here. Mal's like not content. And it's like, it serves penultimately as a reminder, or like just as reminders for when she finally doesn't, or she finally stops being a Grisha, where you're like, oh, hey, remember that argument we had over and over and over? And after all of that, it's the ending of like, and they lived happily ever after. Just
I'm gonna stop you. I'm gonna stop you right here, because that goes a bit into rants and bans. So, okay, for characters, here we go. Least favorite character. Let's go and make it a bit snappy so we can get to the rants and bans, because I feel like we have a lot to talk about there. So, least favorite character, if you have one.
Actually can't. I can't really pinpoint least favorite character in terms of characters that I didn't like. The character that absolutely made me want to drive my head into a wall was the Apparat in the 3rd book. Him being so snarky, and like, I all the words that I need to describe him are flying out of my head, but this sort of like self-righteous. He is so self-righteous and condescending in the beginning of book 3 that it actually pained me, those couple of chapters when they were in the cave. And that's a good villain. That's a villain, or that's a good, not necessarily a villain, but that's a good like hurdle to overcome, because reading it, you don't see any positives of this character. You're like, you're just deplorable, not because you're doing anything wrong, but because in your own self-righteousness, you think that you know what's best, even though, like, from an outside perspective, you can see that this makes no sense, and you're you're stalling the story out for better things to come. Not that it went anywhere, but like it. Book 3 actually started off really well with conflict, mainly through the apparat.
Yeah.
And he's my least favorite character because he was such an asshole.
So I'm gonna one up you and talk about the one and only Nikolai's bro, who
I can't even have him as my least favorite character because his
because he's
existence,
such a dumb shit.
his existence serves probably one of the best parts of the book. Honest to God, his existence is pure genius because it's so realistic. But
yeah,
like,
but as a character, least favorite character, he's such a dumbass, and the fact that it was yeah, like he's a realistic character of like people who are stupid but think but are in power. So him like trying to court Alina, him doing that ridiculous deal to not see what was behind it. Yeah, so basically he's my least favorite character. But we'll talk about more about the kind of like the story surrounding it later on. Let's get to favorite and least favorite scene. Okay, you can say a couple words so we can get to the rants and bants around them, but
okay, like I don't have scenes. I have moments. Like one of I can't really even say anything. Like to me, there are not any things that really stand out. One of the things that I really did love was the banquet scene, which led to at the end of book 2, which led to the entire just destruction of the palace and the little palace. And we can talk more about why later. But that, honestly, pure like if storytelling ever peaked in this book, it actually kind of peaked there for me, not because of anything extraordinary, but because of how realistic it is. And of all the things, I read this and it was kind of like life imitating or art imitating life to a certain extent. Of I felt so connected to these characters and their reactions at that point. So beautifully done. And the next was surprisingly the emotional scenes with the Darkling, of sort of those moments where you learn more of his backstory and with regards to his name, Alexander. Very well done, but those come later.
Darkling fan, I understand. Okay,
I
so
mean,
you hidden Darkling fan. You just came in being all like, Nikolai, no, fam. You're number
Nikolai
one.
is beautiful. Nikolai is a beautiful human being, but in terms of tragedy, the Darkling, like, they did him dirty by not fully expanding on his potential, but it's there. Like all
right, what about least favorite?
I don't know. All of book 3 was kind of trash. I mean, I'm not gonna lie.
It's true though.
Like, look, guys, let's be honest here. Book 1 was setup. Like, book 1 was pure setup. The entirety of the time, you're just like, where's this culminating to? And fair enough, the ending of book 1, you're just like, oh shit, Darkling's evil. Oh my god, things are going. Book 2, pure, like, honest to God, it was like the crowning jewel of this trilogy. And then you get to book 3, and you have so much hope after book 2. And then it just kind of goes nowhere. It's the book that goes nowhere and then all of a sudden ends. That's what's so frustrating about it. So many, like, everything's tied off in the end. Everything sort of resolves itself, but it resolves itself in a way where you're sitting there going, well, this wasn't really that satisfying. Like, I know everything's rounded off. Like, I know what happens to all these characters, but I'm not satisfied. Like, half of these things just feel like you were writing exposition through most of the book and going like, oh, what am I supposed to do? I need to, oh shit, I've got like 20 pages left. Sure, why not? And done. It's done. It's
I mean, my favorite scene or even part, I would say, is honestly the beginning of book 2, which involves the Bone Road as well as Stormund. Like, that bit of the book. I mean, I think I even mentioned it to you when I was reading. I was debating whether to buy book 2 or not, and that was kind of like the point. I was like, yes, I'm buying this book. It's amazing. I
And
just
then book
liked
3 happened.
Yeah, and then book 3 happened. Like Nove Zem, we visited a bit of Nove Zem. We visited the Bone Road. We had just like the conflict of her, with the amplifiers, like the pull of it. Even though she was debating it, and finally she makes her choice to kind of graft it onto herself. Um, the survival aspect, like it was just an adventure. It was a good adventure. It had a lot of stakes. You felt like it was going somewhere. And then you have I agree with you, the least favorite scene, which is literally almost the entirety of book 3, because it felt like it honestly felt like there wasn't there was no payoff. It started off really, really well. I think the apparat, that bit where they were going through it was great. Um, and then it's just kind of like, oh, let me take you to my secret base in the Furidian Mountains. I guess actually, let's do it this way. So that was the end of like the scenes and stuff like that, and now we're just gonna get to the rants and bants, and we're gonna start with book 3 because I feel like I have a lot to say and Alex has a lot
It's
to say.
both rants and bans.
And bans. But yes,
Oh god.
continuing about book 3. The issue with book 3, so I think the biggest issue with the entire series is pacing, and the biggest issue in this series for pacing was book 3, because unlike book 1, which you can forgive for it being a setup book,
It's build up, yeah.
yeah, you like, all right, fair enough. It's a bit slow. I'm gonna be honest. It's a bit slow. Like if you think about it, nothing much actually happens in book 1. But fair enough. Like we're establishing it's her first book, kind of like fair enough.
And you can tell it's leading up to something.
Yeah,
The thing
exactly.
is, like book 1, you feel that something is happening, and then like the end of book 1 kind of justifies that by showing its cards, going like, "Hey, the Darkling's evil." Everything that what was nice about it is this a subversion. This entire book. Sorry to jump, but this entire book was basically we're establishing one thing, and then at the very end, everything that we've established is wrong. Like all of this of what you thought is like, it's not true. The Darkling's evil. You're actually being controlled, and at least personally, I never saw it coming.
Because I think it was done very organically. Everything that he said, if you go back and read it, you're like, yeah, actually, he's not lying per se. Like there are moments where he clearly is trying to manipulate her when upon like looking back, but the stuff that he says, it, as he points out in book 2, isn't technically not true. He does say like, I need you, right? Like it's her fault for taking it as a like. And then it also points out that there was the moment, I think, as well at the beginning of book 2 where they brought back or at the end of book 1 where they're brought back, and she was like, look, it could have been us. Like we could have done what you wanted to do. You just didn't have to make me, like, you didn't have to force your will onto me. And I like the struggle there in the Darkling. But anyway, I agree with you. Like there was some build up in book 1. Book 3, on the other hand, it felt like, okay, we're starting off with a high. We're starting off with the apparat. We're starting off with this really believable situation that we need to get out of. And then all of a sudden, here comes Nikolai, who, effed off for like the last how many month and a half. We don't know if he's alive or dead. He has this base in the Furidian Mountains, which I guess, like, sure. That location in itself, I feel, was very unimpressive, honestly. I kind of wish that it was like nestled between the mountains. It was a bit more, because the way that it's described, it just feels really cold and desolate and not cool. Like it doesn't feel cool. It's
not a sci-fi base now. Like we
no,
don't
no,
have
I mean,
anything
like it doesn't
cool.
feel cool. It's like it's a Nikolai, and all you get is literally like a hole in a mountain.
What do you expect from the man? He's literally behind enemy territory building all these things, and you want a giant neon sign going Nikolai's dream palace. Like,
no, but
come on,
it still doesn't, like, let me put it this way. All of the other locations that we visited like Stormund's ship, like Nove Zem, the little palace, the big palace, the folds, all of the different cities, you were like, oh, this is a cool place. I would like, if I could see it, I would love to see it.
Mm.
I have no interest in this base in the middle, like inside a mountain at all. Maybe that's just a me thing, but that was such a letdown. And then from that point, yes, Bagra sacrificing herself, which was like, oh, that was great. But from that point on, you just get nothing. You get them on a ship, like, all right, I don't really care. Like, there's no description of the surrounding world. Then they're like next to this little tiny town. No idea what the town looks like. They're just on the run, like, fair enough. And then we literally get them looking for the third amplifier. That was probably where the book picked up for me. Like, again, we started getting the surroundings, kind of them traveling, and started going into that adventure mode again. And then, the third amplifier stuff happened, and you're like, great, Mal's gonna die. Yes. Finally, stakes. Finally, some sort of.
Yes, he's gonna die. Honestly, there were many points where I was like, please die. Please die. But we'll get to that. We'll get to that.
It was like you were happy that he was, or not
relevant.
happy. You were kind of like, okay, that makes sense, right? Like, okay, that makes sense. He's gonna have to die. Like, that just, it works, right? And then you get to the end, and not only is the final fight lackluster, the final fight doesn't feel like a final fight. That's kind of it. Like that, there's no oomph. Like, I don't know if it's the writing that's lacking, or if it's the exposition, or how it's done, but it just doesn't feel like a final fight. It doesn't feel like it's actually that monumentous. And on top of that, we have the problem of the Sun Summoner uses all three amplifiers, and we have a bunch of Sun Summoners now. Like, and if somebody tells me this, like, no, you misunderstood, it's actually them temporarily getting, even though I don't think it's temporary, I think that's the entire point.
Which makes it, if it's temporary, that's the rawest deal anybody's ever gotten. I get all three amplifiers put together, you lose your powers and a temporary army of Sun Summoners. Like,
yeah, no, I don't think it's temporary, because like I think at the end of the book they were like playing with their new powers, and she was like watching them. But again, a Sun Summoner is supposed to be like this rare ass type of Grisha, and all of a sudden you have like a dozen of them.
And don't try and convince me that Morozov. Okay, first of all, Morozov. Like, I nearly had a stroke every single time I read this man's name. Morozov. There's no A at the end. It's completely unnecessary. And then her name is Alina Starkov. Oh God, it's like, okay, Leigh.
Let's go to point 2. Actually, I feel like this is the second biggest gripe that I had, and you had as well, having being Eastern European.
There was a point where I wanted to finish off. Like, we will get to the Eastern European part. I just want to finish off with.
Yeah, all right.
I don't mind per se that it ended how it ended, like the final fight, because it kind of it's things in life don't usually end in a spectacular, calamitous fight, or like a spectacular display of power, whatever. Sometimes it actually ends with a whimper rather than a bang, and this is why I love, honest to God, love the ending of book 2, the fight for the Royal Palace, where Nikolai's brother, acting all high and mighty, we barely really hear from him. He's barely a character. We just see that he's a bit stupid, and Nikolai's just kind of going like, yeah, my brother's kind of like vain, and he should give up the throne, doesn't want to give up the throne. So that dynamic's very well done. And then at this giant feast, which the brother organizes, he lets them know that he concluded a deal with the Fjerdans to open the borders or something like that.
Yep.
And that causes the attack, which allows the Darkling to get through the defenses put down by Nikolai. And it shows that these things can happen out of sheer stupidity, that you could plan it out perfectly, and then all of a sudden a small insignificant character, which you think is insignificant, all of a sudden pulls off just an entire coup and just ruins everything. And that's why, sort of looking at it, the final fight, definitely not well done in terms of the Sun Summoners, in terms of everything, but I can live with that. But don't tell me that Morozova, when he made the 3 amplifiers, thought, this is going to be great. What these 3 things do when put together is take the person's power and give it to everybody else. Because then is this just for the Sun Summoner, or is this like if an Inferni took it? Because it's clearly stated, that in the amplifiers are used by the Grisha who kills these mythical creatures. There's no specific mention of like, you have to be this powerful, you have to be the Sun Summoner. It's just, you can use them. And obviously they're so mythic and rare that they would be used by somebody very powerful.
I'm going to interrupt and say that we have in the book as well other amplifiers being shown. There was like, I think somebody with a ring and somebody with a necklace. So so amplifiers exist as a concept. So Morozova's amplifiers are just the strongest ones, but they are a part of an established Grisha kind of tool that exists in the world. So Morozova, continue, but I just wanted to point out that it was established that this was a thing that Grisha can use. Like, there was in no way being like, this is what only the Sun Summoner can use.
And then for some reason, all these 3 things, when put together, just take away your power, give it to other people. So again, what happens when a random Squaller gets it? When a random Inferni gets it? When a Heartrender gets it? Do their powers transfer, or does everybody become Sun Summoners as well? And then you just go like, wait, what? How did this happen? And then also, how did he intend for this to happen in the first place? How do you make this happen? Like, this is you're basically making like just a weird ass Wi-Fi system where you take it from one person, just give it off to everybody else. Like, you torrent it. You're like the main seed. You just give it off to everybody else, and then you lose everything. I don't understand it. I don't understand it. It's just, it makes no sense. It feels like she came up with the concept of the 3 amplifiers put together to stop the fold, but she didn't know how to execute it.
Yeah.
And so she really just pulled something out of a hat. She just went, you know what? This'll do. This'll do. This is so ridiculous that nobody will ever think to question it.
Yeah,
because why
I think she wrote herself into a corner when she said even the Sun Summoner alone might not be powerful enough to destroy the fold.
So let's make more.
No, exactly. So instead of her maybe, I don't know, like following the trope of the Darkling, seeing, the kind of like whatever he did was wrong. She needed a way of it working.
Yeah.
But I thought the entire point of the Sun Summoner not being enough was that's why she went to get the amplifiers, in order to amplify her power for her to be able to do it alone. So I'm confused. Maybe if we're missing something, by the way, if anybody's watching this and actually has an opinion or like has more background about this, if they've read interviews or what have you, please comment down below. Let us know what we're missing, because this is just the way that we perceive the book, right? This is just the way that from reading the book, this is how we got it. So there might be something that we missed, but
it would have even been perfect that after we find out that Mal is a 3rd amplifier, and I'm not even going to talk about, I nearly had a fit when they find out that he's the amplifier, and then they're talking about, near death, and all of a sudden they're just joking about like, oh, and he's just going like, oh, well, what am I supposed to say? I'm gonna die. It's like, you were basically on an emotional teetering edge this entire time about not being able to spend time with Alina, and that she's a Grisha and everything like that, and now all of a sudden you're about to die, leave this plane of existence forever, and you're just okay with that. You're like, well, I guess I'm gonna be Banty now. Like, it completely inconsistent character. But it would have made sense. It would have made sense that the Sun Summoner is not enough to defeat the fold. You need to bring all of the amplifiers together. You find out Mal's the 3rd amplifier. oh my God, okay, now this is a moral dilemma. What do you do? This is the person you grew up with. This is the person that you've gone through everything with. He has had to go through all this hardship with you, having been an Utkazaya, like while you're a Grisha, like literally two different planes of existence. Like the Darkling says, he will never, nobody will ever understand what it's like to be us. He will never understand as a non-Grisha. And then you're having this person who has literally sacrificed everything and is still there, still willing to protect you, to then give his life so that you can do what needs to be done, the ultimate sacrifice. And it would have been perfect to have him die. And I'm not talking about what they did about him dying and then 2 seconds later coming back to life through some bullshit. I mean, actual dead.
Actual dead.
They did my man Matthias dirty in Crooked Kingdom by killing him because, you know, death is cool and all. But then Mao, who makes sense, it makes sense for him to die, to bring this book, this trilogy, to an emotional close of sacrifice and doing things for the greater good. And sometimes you get the short straw. You have to be the one who's basically abused this entire time, whether emotionally or actually physically, only to then have to be the one to sacrifice yourself, because that's just how life is. That would have been an emotional sort of, it would have been so gratifying to read. Not for his sake, but for ours.
It would have been as well, I feel like, a great impact or like a great wake-up call for Alina to have been like, you know, Mal kept saying, I keep giving you this, right? He kept and reiterating inside the book. If he vanished, if he actually died, Alina could then have said, well, you know, she could have seen the world where Mal isn't there for her. And I feel like that would have been, you know, in a grand poetic way, showing and not telling.
Yeah.
And I do completely agree, by the way. Hopefully nobody got spoiled there for Crooked Kingdom. But Matthias, I feel, yeah, if you compare Matthias's death to Mal's supposed death, there's two characters, like it should have been reversed, honestly. And I mean, on top of the fact that I just have a lot of questions about the what day-to-day kind of issues about Mal being the third amplifier. Like, you're telling me this entire time they never touched before, that they didn't get like this kind of strong feeling, like if he's an amplifier like the Darkling, right? Because that's the thing, right? They're related. So Mal and the Darkling, by the way, related. So
yeah,
he's like his cousin or something, or
yeah.
nephew or whatever. And I think cousins. So by logic, right? You logically, Mal would be amplifying Alina's power the same way the Darkling is. Like, the fact that Mal doesn't know he's an amplifier isn't going to reduce his magical potency of like his bones or what have you. So
oh, reduce the magical potency of his bones. Nice. That's good.
So did they never like touch before? Did nothing happen before? Like, how was it hidden so long? And on top of that, this might be like really nitpicky, but okay, let's say it all had to do with awareness or like being awakened, what have you. The last night when they totally like got it on in the greenhouse, are you telling me that she wasn't like a freaking sun?
Oh my God.
The entire
Stop. Stop. Come on, man. We're here to actually discuss the top.
No, but like, again, no, but I'm trying to bring the point about.
No, but okay.
There is no consistency. I think that's actually brings me to my next point, which is to do with Morozov and Morozova and the cultures as well in the Grisha-verse. And that is, it feels like there's a lack of consistency. Coming back, like going from the consistency in the way that amplifiers work, let's go to the consistency of the actual world and start from the fact, again, as Alex mentioned, or as basically as you mentioned, there is Morozova and Morozov. So in Eastern European languages, right, like in Russian, in Ukrainian,
In
in
Cyrillic.
Hungarian, in Belarusian, I'm pretty sure, all of the, so your last name gets conjugated depending on your gender. So if you're female, you would get an A or an ova or what have you at the end. If you're male, it would be cut off. In which case, when I first read Morozova, I was like, all right, it's a woman. First of all, I was like, oh, that's cool. We have like a really like powerful Grisha woman who had these, and then all of a sudden it's Ilya. I'm like, okay, it's a guy, I guess. This is wrong. And then you have Alina Starkov, so she's not Starkovna or whatever. There's no female ending. And there you can argue and say, well, she created it, right? Like she created this world. She modified and said, we'll flip it over, right? We'll give males the ova, whatever. We'll give females the without that, and we'll have kvass. And the kvass in real life is a real life beverage. Like we've drunk it plenty of times. It's really good. It's top notch if you can get your hands on it, but it's not alcoholic. It's not alcoholic in any way, shape, or form in the way that she describes. You can potentially get like 1% kvass apparently, but like most of the time, the vast majority of the time, you go to Eastern Europe, like you go to Ukraine, there's these little buses and carts in the middle of summer. They sell you kvass on tap, like little kids come up. It's good. It is good. So okay, and we can say she changed that, right? She changed it for her world. She took a real life thing and then she changed it for her world. But then based on Six of Crows and Crooked Kingdom, on top of that, when we meet the Rafkin market, etc., Pilmeni, the exact same thing as it is in our world. The Balalaika, exactly the same thing as it is in our world. I'm pretty sure there are plenty of others, but those are the two things that come straight off the top of my head. So to me, it was like, all right, well, if you're not changing these things, but you're changing these things, it felt like a very kind of, where is the consistency in your manipulation of real life? Like why or how or what is happening? So it was very off-putting reading something and being like, okay, I expect it to be this way, and then it not being that way, and then you read the next thing and it's like, oh, well, this is going to be different now, right? It's like, no, this is the same. And I feel like maybe this is a lot bigger of a gripe for us as Eastern Europeans than it is maybe for somebody who wasn't born around this culture, because it's like, well, I'm just going to take what the author says as given. But it was strangely strangely annoying, let's put it this way, and it kind of felt a bit disingenuous. I read about Leigh's background, and apparently her mom is half Hungarian, so she has Hungarian lineage or like background. But with all due respect, it is a bit like you kind of, yeah, it felt a bit like not thought through enough. Like I feel if you commit to changing an existing culture in order to fit your world, it needs to be either done thoroughly or not at all. Like it can't be just half and half. Otherwise, it makes not a lot of sense. But that's my hot take.
I feel like what this series would greatly benefit from is you take a lot of those very redundant descriptions. You take those scenes that dragged on for far too long and you establish the culture better. Because one of the things that was really nice about Six of Crows and Crooked Kingdom was Ketterdam. By the end of the duology, you felt as if you had a handle on what Ketterdam was, the culture there, the people there, everything. Sort of like you have an understanding of the setting that you're in. With Ravka, you just have words thrown at you. You just have like things to set the mood of, like, you have kvass, you have pilmeni, you have all these things, you have like these exotic sounding things, but they never really dive into what it is. You never really get more than just a sort of a glimpse at it and sort of these words to just establish the scene without actually really going into it. And I feel like that was one of the, like you said, one of the annoying parts where you're just confronted by all these words that have a meaning to you. And sometimes she would change words that weren't actually like there was, I think, one of the times in like the third book or so where she just calls like the great worm like almaz or something
Oh,
like that, like
izumrud.
izumrud, like
Yeah.
izumrud, the great word, like izumrud is an emerald. Like you're just taking words now and you're assigning them different meanings. And again, this is artistic license. You can do whatever you want. We're not saying that, Eastern European culture is off the table. But at one point, you're just taking things and you're just making them like, you're taking an established thing. You're not even changing the word. You're just taking the word, but you're just changing everything behind it, which
or not changing, because I just remembered two other words, merzost and отkaziatka, right? Merzost, it's an actual word, which means like mirzotny, etc. It means like vile and disgusting. Yeah, like you don't want it, which fits in what she's trying to describe. And then also отkaziatka, there's like the verb otkazatsa, which means like to reject, yeah, to cast aside. So again, it makes sense, right? Orphans, отказятки, like etc.
I thought those were the people without powers. I thought that was the entire...
Yeah, without powers. But I think there was another word for it they used for orphans as well. But anyway, the entire point is that when you read those words, you were like, all right, yeah, this means what it means. And she kind of like roughly changed the spelling, changed it a bit, maybe borrowed it from a different Eastern European language, right? A Slavic language, which has that, but which is really similar. But fair enough, like it means what it means. But then, as you said, we have words which, like izumrud, yeah, it's like why is he the emerald worm? Why? Where are we going?
I honestly feel like, as much as we've spent time on it, it's not that big of a thing to just, put down this series and never read. I feel like to just kind of, at least, it feels like this is something that should have been better thought up of. If you're going to incorporate the culture, do it in a better way. Don't just kind of throw words at it expecting people who have I mean, it might work for people who don't know the culture. It's like, okay, yeah, like, this is like kind of exotic. And like, it's honestly kind of nice to see Eastern European culture portrayed in fiction.
I was about to say on the flip side is that I think
it's not something that's like really covered that much. Like Eastern European culture is very new, even though it has a very large standing within the greater world in real life. So
it
was kind of nice to see that.
Actually, let's put it this way, it's very old. And a lot of people, I think Western culture has just, overshadowed it, even though Eastern culture is in a way, I mean, like, is a foundation for a lot more of the cross between Asian culture and Western culture, because of the fact that where it originated, and a lot of going into history, we're going to skip that. But again, I do appreciate that there is some active Eastern European representation. And I also would like to mention, so people don't start hitting that dislike button immediately, but like, the fact that we say all of these things doesn't mean that we didn't like the books. If we didn't like the books, we would straight out be like, this book was awful. Like this, as in like this book was probably awful and we didn't like it. That is what we would say. If we don't say that, it means that we enjoyed the book and we have thoughts to say about it. It's just stuff that we would either like answers to, or we found lacking that we think could have been improved on. But that doesn't mean that you can't enjoy something that isn't perfect, right? That's the entire thing. It's more like a critical evaluation of the entire book, because I feel like that a couple of people who watched the Crooked Kingdom review kind of didn't get that the fact that we liked it, because I think what I agree with you is Ketterdam. Thank you Russell Shorto for like giving an amazing book to base it off on. But Ketterdam was very realistic and like he kind of hit home a bit, like a different part of home. But yeah, I feel like Ravka could have just benefited from more development. Like if you're taking the culture, then put in a bit more effort into building it up rather than just throwing 3 city names around like Novokrebinsk and uh,
Yeah.
Karamzin.
Well, that's just sort of how it goes. That's it wasn't ever going to be perfect, but you know what is perfect? You know what is perfect? Alexander. Like, I'm okay. Let me actually just release the floodgates on my love for the Darkling and his story. Or actually, no. Let me flip this and say, Leigh Bardugo, what did you do to him? My poor boy had 5 mentions in the 3rd book. You could have made it perfect. You could have made the ultimate sympathetic villain of a boy. You built it up so well. You had Bagra literally telling the story of this boy who was just mesmerized by these stories of Morozova and wanting to be the best Grisha. And okay, best Grisha sounds like a Pokemon trainer, but like he wanted to be the best there ever was.
To catch them was his
And
real
then,
test.
and then it just sort of goes nowhere.
His
Oh my
cause.
god. Okay. Like let's be serious for like he could have been one of the ultimate sympathetic villains through background, through sort of torment, through everything. And he as a villain is so perfect to me because a lot of what he does is through his own logic, it all makes sense. Like any good villain, their code or the way that they do things fits with their own philosophy. In terms of how he wanted to protect Ravka, he wanted to use the fold to defeat all the people who were going to invade Ravka, who were a threat to Ravka. In his mind, that was the only way he was going to do it within his powers, within using the darkness. And oh my god, I got so into my own train of thought, I kind of lost it. And so you have this character who is using his own philosophy to do so, and that is at the crux of why he is such a sympathetic villain and why he sort of lost his way through this sort of fight for power. And that just brings it hits so much harder, where after you see him as sort of this charming character in the 1st book, revealed to who he is in the 2nd book of just sort of being kind of a bastard, really. And then you have these emotional moments between him and Alina where he opens up about his name being Alexander. And at the end, when he's being burned at the stake, Alina sort of sending a prayer for him. It was so perfect in his character evolution that he was somebody who lost their way but always tried to stick to their own moral philosophy and sort of moral code of what they wanted to achieve.
Yeah.
That in the end, it's the quote from The Dark Knight, where you either die a hero, or you live long enough to see yourself become the villain.
Yeah.
And that really was what the Darkling became. He lived so long and he was so ambitious that he inevitably became corrupted, and he became sort of the symbol of hatred. And this is what I wanted to say. One of the quotes, and why book 3 to me, it's garbage. Really, really is like meme garbage, but it has amazing scenes, like where they're going into the folds to have this ultimate showdown with the Darkling, and through this Discord chat that they have going on between each other, she finds out that he's taken all the kids from Karamzin, and she's now in a panic about how he's going to bring them into the fold and using them as meat shields. And so she devises this entire Alina and everybody else devise this entire plan of freeing them. But then they get there and they're not there. And the Darkling says, "Didn't I tell you I am ready to play the part of your villain?" And that was what was so good about him, because he is deplorable. He is all these things that people make him out to be. But then he himself knows it. He knows how people perceive him. He's not blind to the rest of the world and how day-to-day things go. And that's why he didn't need to bring the children there, because he knows that Alina thinks that that's who he is.
Yeah.
And by that alone, that is what is sort of her downfall in that situation, lets him get the upper hand. He is a smart villain. He is a smart person. And that is why he is one of the best written characters. And then they still managed to ruin it all. They still managed to ruin it all by not giving enough of it. Because as much as I love Alexandra, as much as I love all these scenes, there is no emotional buildup to any of it. If there was a bit more of the Darkling there, a bit more of his background being incorporated into it, it would feel like we're earning this emotional payoff where we can, it's like you see the light at the end of the tunnel. You can see how he should be the sympathetic villain who at the end of the day, while completely deplorable, was just a child who was ruined in a certain way by the pursuit of power, etc., etc., and lost along the way, and all these people start to hate him because of that. But it feels sort of hollow at the end. It feels like it was given to you in a certain way, but it doesn't feel earned, and it doesn't feel like it gives you the catharsis that you need. And I feel like that's where this entire trilogy sort of falls apart, is that the catharsis that you, I don't want to say deserve, but the catharsis that you need at the end of the story feels hollowed out by specific choices that are made in the ending.
I feel we can actually come back to the Discord chat that you mentioned between Alina and the Darkling. That in book 2, the Darkling kind of used it to come visit her, and that was, this massive issue basically, that she kept seeing him, and she was kissing Mal, but then all of a sudden she was like seeing the Darkling, and really trippy, etc. But in book 3, she visited the Darkling a couple times, like once or twice, but he couldn't visit her any longer, and I was kind of confused as to why. I didn't really understand why there wasn't more of him trying to find her, or vice versa. I felt like it would have been bear with me, but like in Star Wars, the new trilogy, right? The Rise of Skywalker, with Kylo Ren and Rey, I felt like the bond, actually, the way that the bond was displayed, like these characters kept being drawn to each other. That was the entire point. Like there was this kind of need to like keep checking in, or like keep, when you use your power, you immediately kind of got flickered back to the other person. Like again, the concept of what was the concept where like they're like a duad, yeah, like basically these two, like something being split into two.
Okay.
Yeah, so there's a name for that, but anyway, they're like they were like, that concept in and of itself is like wild in the Star Wars universe, like whatever. But the fact that they kept being drawn to each other because of the fact like they were similar, it felt logical. Whereas in this case, it's like all of this is happening and you're not using it to even just spy on him, or like to mess with his head like he did with yours. Like,
I mean, that's a part that Mal actually brings up. He's just like, why aren't you doing that? And then she's like, oh yeah, you're right, and never does anything with it ever again.
yeah.
Like,
so
or Nikolai, no, Nikolai brings up the fact. So it's, and I think that's one of the biggest problems of just the writing style. Just because you're meta about it doesn't make it okay. Just because you point to an issue and go, why aren't you doing this in the book? And the character goes, yeah, you're right, and doesn't do anything about it. That's not clever. That's not like, oh, this like, oh, we've circumvented the issue. It leaves the reader going like, yeah, why aren't you doing that?
yeah, it's like, why are you being stupid, or why are you making this choice that makes no sense, basically. So that's kind of my issue with the Darkling, is that I felt, yeah, book 3 was like, maybe that's why I didn't feel as impacted by the end as I should have been, because it didn't feel like there was any build-up to it from the Darkling's side. So that's kind of my gripe with that. Um, from what I can remember, like those are my biggest ones. If there's anything else that you like to bring up, do tell.
I feel like book three really relied on the sort of right place, right time to push forward the plot. This sort of goes back to the general gripes about writing style and pacing, but book three really, where book one and two felt like a very natural progression of events, to the point of being like, wow, this is actually really well written, because sometimes these things just happen and you like have it hinted towards you. Book three really felt as if it was just case in points when they finally get out of the caves, and they're trying to find Nikolai and meet up with him, and they get attacked by a band of thieves, and at that particular moment Nikolai for some reason swerves down and saves the day. Now the setup is there for, this is the town that they're next to is a one that the Stormhund is apparently operating out of, etc etc, but it just feels like it became a lot more about timing, coincidences, and looking for the biggest like oh snap moment, like
Yeah.
oh how are they going to get out of this one, and then it happens and you're like oh my god they made it out, but they made it out by pure happenstance. It wasn't clever, it wasn't anything thought through, it was just sheer luck, which I guess is a way that stories progress and how it happens in real life, that luck is what gets you through it. But then it felt, I don't remember, like did anybody die, did anybody get mortally injured with the thieves, because then that would have felt like, you know, they started executing people or something like that, and then Stormhund comes and you're like oh thank god he was there to save them. It just felt like there was no there were no stakes, and then all of a sudden it's resolved. There were conflict was introduced momentarily to provide
A reason for Nikolai to swoop in.
A reason for Nikolai to swoop in, or just provide a moment for the audience to go, oh, how are they going to get out of this? But you know that they're going to get out of this because there's still like most of the book left. They're somehow going to get out of this. But
it would work in a movie. Yeah, but because it's like kind of, if you're watching a movie, you don't really know what's happening. Like you don't see the remaining part of the film, like in a cinema. Let's put it this way. Like you can't see. Whereas in a book, if you're holding it and you're just like, well, there's like 250 pages left in a 300-page book.
And you know that they're like in the prime position because they are the main characters. They're going to get out of this somehow. And I don't know. Overall, like for all the things that I've said about book three, book two makes this entire series worth it. Honestly, if you book one and two read
it
together,
should have been a duology. That's what I titled my like. I don't mean that book three shouldn't exist, but I do think she could have actually somehow made this like a thick duology. I feel like it would have been like, it would have basically do book one and two as book one, and then book three as book two, but flesh out book three like really, really well with like more
it would be thick though. That would be like kind of teetering on the 1,000-page.
Oh, but like again, it's I would like
Brandon Sanderson. I see you. I see the influences.
I would say it's more. I'll argue about the position of it being a YA novel, like, but I just have now, the more I research into it, because I want to make a video about YA and it as a genre, like I have a lot of thoughts about what it is. But point being, like again, 1,000 pages, fair enough. Like I do think it could have just benefited from more exposition, and you could have just made it into 2 books. Or like 3 really fleshed out ones. But what I wanted to bring up is 2 things that I remembered. In book 3, I really liked the scene where Nikolai, where we see that Nikolai retains his intelligence as whatever creature that he is, and he tries to like he points to her to try and like get the darkness out of him. I thought that was like, yes, I'm here for it. Which again, I swear to all things that Leigh Bardugo wrote fan fiction back in the day, because I don't know if you guys know, but if you go and read fan fiction like on AO3 or fanfic.net from like decent writers, there is a very common voice, like that fundamental voice that people use in fan fiction. Um, it's very similar, or like the way that they describe stuff happening. Um, it's there. So it when I read that scene, I was like, yeah, this would be like something that a fan fiction writer would write about this series, but she's the author, so she can do it for her own thing. So that was really, really good. And another thing, but this is more a bit like kind of like a question mark. If anybody can elaborate on this, please leave a comment. I thought that it was going in the direction that Alina wanted to create her own Merzost. That was the entire thing in book 2, where she was like, oh, he creates his own Merzost, and she starts dabbling in it, right? Like she starts thinking about it. That Bagra was like, don't do it. This is awful. This takes part of you. And that's what I thought was actually going to happen, was that another alternative was that she was going to sacrifice her heroicness, like her righteousness, her sun summoner, like, you know, her power, I guess, but she was going to create this Merzost that would then cancel out the dark Merzost or something like that, because I would assume that her Merzost would be.
Didn't they talk
light.
about like light soldiers at one point? Was that?
Yeah, that it rings a bell, right? Like it does ring a bell. So I'm not sure what actually happened with that.
I feel like the problem is because then you're making Mirzas like you can't portray sunlight and sun soldiers as Mirzas. It like at least in my mind it doesn't really fit because Mirzas literally feels like
Sun soldiers were the people who like were loyal
no
to
no
her.
no okay yeah like yes okay the cult its own thing. The cult is a cult, to throw people at the problem, true Eastern European style. But no. I'm talking about like her coming up with like actual sun soldiers in her own form of Mirzas. But then, yeah, you can't really call them Mirzas now, can you?
Yeah, no,
it's like,
but
oh,
I
it's
thought
good. Oh
I
yeah,
thought
but like
that there was a thing where she was considering creating her own, and that kind of never went anywhere. Or did I miss? Or was her like giving away the power to the other people the way?
Mirzas really doesn't make a lot of sense. I'm gonna be honest. Like the last thing where she somehow resurrects Mal through Mirzas, through the last little whimpers of Mirzas within her, I thought that was like from the Darkling. The Darkling's dead, and yet she still has it. Or like there was
I thought she. I'm not even sure. Yeah, like that's another thing. The Darkling's dead, but she still was able to use the darkness. I was like,
oh yeah,
I
yeah,
thought
she uses the darkness, like his power. Like, so how does this work? Did she take it? No, but her powers are gone. And I thought her powers are gone. The sunlight is gone, and yet she still can control Mirzas. Or she still has, and like the entire point was like Mirzas was attracted to her power. That's the reason why there was this connection in the first place.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, it's gone, but you still have these powers for last brief seconds. And I think that's what makes it worse, is for those last brief seconds where she has this power, which is inexplicably there for some reason, she manages to resurrect this guy and get her happily ever after. It's such like a we put the ribbon on the top.
Happily ever after, because then you have the argument, which is a lot of people that don't like, is that Mal gets his non-Grisha girlfriend essentially in the end. Like he doesn't grow to accept her for who she is.
Yeah.
He just, yeah.
Like Mal should have died. She should have lived with the consequences and kept her powers, or like not kept her powers, but he should have died. that would have been, that is the only ending
And that would
makes
have been
sense.
the end, and that would have been the end of the entire Morozova bloodline.
Yeah.
Because essentially how he survived, they said, well, he had the life of his own,
Yeah.
and he
Oh my
had the life
God.
of the thing, but like that doesn't work like that, because you'd essentially be you're living on a borrowed lifeline anyway. Like he would not exist as a person if that like great 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 grandmother didn't exist. So
Okay, that's right.
no, so
Continue and
it makes no sense, because if she'd like had him or had his ancestor before she died, then you can argue it's kind of like, oh, blood magic type of like, let's pass it down. But here, he literally would not exist without her having been resurrected. Therefore, he can't have two lives. Like
Yep.
he only had the life of the bonesmith that the bonesmith gave that line. And that's the only life he should have had.
I'm like curious about how does that work? So we're establishing that the amplifier nature of his bones is from his grandmother, great grandmother, which was Morozova's daughter, who was resurrected by him, and thus became the amplifier. Okay, sure. If the daughter had a kid, are both of them amplifiers? Does her amplifier go to the child and she's no longer an amplifier? How does this work?
I think
Is there two amplifiers at the same time?
Yeah, in this case,
Is that four amplifiers then?
Yeah,
do you have to kill both of them? Like, how does this work? Like, how do you transfer this? Like, the fact that you're saying, oh yeah, you got the amplifier from her, cool. Like, the concept is cool. Somehow the amplifier nature of the bones is being transferred. But at the same time, it's not cool because it makes no sense. Like, does it like pass on? What if you have multiple kids? The first kid's an amplifier, the second kid isn't. Can you only have one kid? Is it like split off? What if you have twins? What happens if you have twins? What if they're born at the same time? Like, it raises so many questions, which I don't think a normal reader would look at it going like, oh yeah, all these questions exist. The normal reader's like, okay, cool, puts down the book and never has to think about it again. But thinking about it like for a second just made me so angry, because I was like, this makes no sense.
I think it's the fact that the book established itself that Baghra and the Darkling are amplifiers together. Baghra is also an amplifier.
Oh right, yeah, Baghra's an amplifier. Everybody's an amplifier.
Yeah, so basically you can pass it down, right? Then it actually begs the question which you just asked, like, but they're like non-special amplifiers, right? They're not part of Morozova's 3, whatever. Like, they can be killed separately. But like for Morozova's 3, you specifically need a third amplifier. So how does that work from like a passing it down perspective? And like it's never explained, and it's just, yeah. Anyway, it's I'm just gonna say, like, I don't know how long we've been sitting talking about this. It feels like a long time. I feel like if anybody stuck around, God bless. Let us know that you're here. But yeah, all I can say is that I am looking forward to King of Scars, because I'm happy to come back to Nikolai. I'm happy to see apparently he's going to be facing the consequences of what happened to him in this trilogy, like the darkness in him. So that's going to be really cool. I'm happy that it's going to be some interaction with Nina from Six of Crows, because dipping into a bit about the show, but I think that the actress made me like Nina a lot more than the book did. So overall, I'm happy that I read this series. Would I come back to it? Like, would I reread this series inside this world as the books get published? Probably not. Like, maybe if I have time and I decided like there's some massive culminating duology or trilogy, and I'm like, now want to read everything from like the beginning to the very end and appreciate it in a linear manner, then maybe. But I enjoyed it for the value that it adds to Six of Crows and Crooked Kingdom. to the Grisha-verse, and hopefully to King of Scars and Rule of Wolves and whatever else we're going to come up with, or Leigh's going to come up with in the Grisha-verse. That is my hot take, and I will leave it at that.
I'd say that it's nice to see through the evolution of the Grisha-verse trilogy and the Six of Crows duology. The writing style has definitely improved. The pacing gets better from the trilogy to the duology, so her writing is improving. And now, as you said, we're going to have Nikolai, who is arguably the MVP of this trilogy. In the duology, in Six of Crows, or in Crooked Kingdom, he already, like, you know, he had his moments of sheer brilliance where you could see the potential there. So now to actually have it played out as him as the main character for a book, it will, I have honestly very high hopes. I hope they don't pull any bullshit with the use of the Darkling as an amplifier, Nina bringing back the Darkling in some capacity. Like, there are so many elements that have been introduced that make me slightly worried, but at the same time also excited for the, is it duology or trilogy or
Duology, yeah.
Duology,
yeah.
for the next duology. So I guess we'll see. We'll see. And yeah.
I guess maybe that's our next special one-off. I don't think we're gonna rope Becca and Johnny into it, but me and you, now that we've read everything, we can continue with our specials when it comes to the Grisha-verse. And so I guess next book is going to be us discussing the King of Scars.
King of Scars, yeah.
Yeah. I think it might have to be a one-off because I looked at it and luckily it's a chunky book comparable to Six of Crows and Crooked Kingdom, unlike these ones, which are a bit scant on the writing. But yeah, thank you very much if you've listened thus far. Again, this is just a discussion. What did you like about the
bands?
Yeah, rants and bands. Did you like the books? What did you like about the books? What did you not like about the books? If you have any and all answers to any of the questions or like confusion that we have, please post them down below, because yeah, that would be great. So the next video, as I mentioned, hopefully will be the four of us sitting down and then talking about the show and how we think the show has done in comparison with people who know about it, who know the background and don't know the background. So if you're keen on seeing that, I will link that down in the description below when it comes out, also in the cards. But for now, thank you very much for joining Al and I. We are here as your entertainment, and we will catch you in the next one. Bye-bye.